Party, which is running Turkey since 2002 and which was very successful in both the economic sphere, the political democratization sphere, and also in foreign policy. So it was this basic change in the development strategy of the country which started to change things in Turkey. And secondly, of course, the EU accession process came into the picture beginning in mid-1990s. And the third factor, which I never fail to emphasize, is that after the military takeover in 1980, it was so suppressive, it was so brutal, that when the military finally in 1983 withdrew back to the barracks, the intellectuals who had been leaning left and right towards authoritarian and totalitarian kinds of remedies for the problems of Turkey, all of a sudden united, well, not all of a sudden, but gradually united that what Turkey needs is a kind of democracy based on EU norms. So these three forces, the Anatolian bourgeoisie, the EU accession process, and the support coming from the EU for Turkey to democratize. And thirdly, intellectuals adopting a liberal democratic platform were the reasons behind what went right in Turkey in the first decade of the 21st century, with a former post-Islamist party playing the leading role and acquiring an increasingly broader part of population's support, in the end winning 50% of the vote in the elections of 2011. I think I will be able to conclude within 10 minutes to speak about what is happening during the last 3 years, which is increasingly worrisome for people like myself who care about liberties and care about a democratic regime in Turkey. For some reason, which needs to be explained, after this third election victory, Mr. Erdogan, if not the entire Justice and Development Party, started to come out with ideas and also with legislation or administration which started to take the country in the opposite direction. Mr. Erdogan started to say that I need a kind of regime in which the legislative or the judiciary or the media does not hinder me from doing whatever I would like to do. My aim is to make Turkey one of the 10 largest economies of the world by 2023, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Republic. And for me to be able to realize this dream of the century, all power has to be centralized in my own hands. So he started, he controls of course, the legislature because of his large group. Up to 2/3 of the seats in the Turkish parliament belong to the government party. And then he started to also introduce measures to take the judiciary under control. And this was what, just this last week, the AKP group in the parliament adopted a law which shamelessly places the entire judiciary under the commands of the Minister of Justice. Just 2 weeks ago, this government also introduced another law which puts the internet under state control. It's amazing, you see, in Turkey, when the Justice and Development Party came to power in 2002, there were only 30,000 people who were using the internet. Do you know what the number today, the online people in Turkey today? 34 million people, which means that almost half of the population is online. And he started talking, he started behaving as if he began to see Vladimir Putin as his role model, and propagating for a kind of constitution that would imitate Russia and not any of the liberal constitutions. So people began to have doubts about the correctness of the policies followed by this prime minister. And I'm sure you must have heard about the Gezi Park or Taksim Park demonstrations that took place last summer. It all began by the Istanbul municipality starting to cut down trees to make space for to rebuild a military barracks, which would serve as a shopping center and hotel in the center of the city. The protest was triggered by this cutting down of trees, but actually it was a protest against the authoritarian bend in the government. Of course, I could not, count all the ways in which it was turning arbitrary and authoritarian, but he was speaking every day and saying people have to live this way and that way. All young people have to get married, and they all have to have 3 children, and they should not consume alcohol, and they should do this and that. And this was, of course, very, very worrisome. You know, thanks to his reforms, thanks to his leadership in the first decade of the century, we have now 4 million students in universities. And these youngsters are increasingly imbued with a liberal outlook, if not philosophy. They want individualism respected. They want individual rights respected. And this protest in Gezi Park was a protest of the young generations trying to defend their individuality and individual rights. But you know what Mr. Erdogan took these demonstrations to be, which spread to the entire country, of course. Wherever there is a university, a higher educational institution, there were demonstrations protesting Erdogan and his government. He said, well, these are the Western powers who are jealous of the performance of Turkey during our government. They want to stop the development of Turkey. There were crazy, crazy conspiracy theories being, circulated about what these demonstrations were about. Of course, it didn't make sense. It had nothing to do with foreign powers conspiring against Turkey. It was the Turkish people who wanted him to behave well, who wanted him to behave in his previous phase of leadership. That was the first episode. Then came, there are of course other episodes, but I'm just talking about the major episodes. Then came the episode at the end of last year, when it was disclosed that at least 5 ministers of his government were involved in corruption of the gravest kind. They had been taking bribes, and they had been involved in corruption of an unheard of scale. And instead of a rational behavior which would have dictated him to say, okay, some of us may have erred, and they should be put before justice, and they should be punished according to the existing law, he said, no, this is another conspiracy against my government. It is the foreign powers, the United States, Israel, and the Gulen movement, which serves as its lackey, which he calls the parallel state, has devised this conspiracy. It's all fabricated evidence. This is nothing, there is nothing true in these allegations. It's just a made-up story, fabricated story of corruption. Of course, this is increasingly becoming inexplicable in terms of a rational thinking or rationally based approach. And of course now the country is involved. And of course all the time since Gezi Park last year, he's spending all efforts to polarize the country, saying that you are either with me or against me, using this as an election strategy, because he's now faced with 3 elections. One local election, which will be held on March 30, and then a presidential election, which will be held in the summer of this year, and then parliamentary elections to be held next summer. Not this, but next summer. So there are 3 tests for this prime minister and government, and it looks like he will not be able to survive these tests. There are, of course, different interpretations, different views about this issue, but under the Justice and Development Party government, Turkey performed very well in the first decade of the century because of the factors I tried to explain. But unfortunately, since the last election victory, it looks increasingly crazy. It really is so bad that the kind of polarization he is trying to create in the country is threatening stability. I'm afraid that scenes similar to what is going on in Ukraine may be witnessed in Turkey. Inshallah, I hope that will never be the case. But the way he is treating the opposition, the way he is taking his approaches to the opposition is very reminiscent of the worst kind of authoritarian governments. Now, I think I have spoken quite long, something like over an hour. I thank you very much for bearing with me. I didn't see any sign of boredom, thank God, but I believe it was a rather long presentation. I made a similar presentation at the European Parliament yesterday. There is a group in the European Parliament called the Friends of Turkey Europe, and they are since some time organizing a series of roundtable discussions called the Turkey Debate. I was there yesterday and was very happy to host a lot of people who showed interest, and today I thank you very much. I really didn't expect so many to attend this lecture, but I am very happy to see that there is quite a lot of interest in what's going on in Turkey. Thank you very much, and now I'm ready to respond to any and all questions you have in mind. Did I overdone this?
Hello. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I have two questions actually. First, you mentioned that Islamist movement was suppressed, but suddenly during 1970s it was allowed to come back. Why? And the same question applies to Erdogan. Why he suddenly decided to go to the opposite way?
Good questions, of course. Well, you know, the Kemalist state introduced multi-party politics in 1950, but under rather strict conditions. All communist parties, all Islamist parties, all liberal parties were banned, all Kurdish, pro-Kurdish parties were banned, continued to be banned. It was only parties that stuck to the Kemalist principles of the Turkish state which were allowed to participate. But after 2 decades, beginning in early 1970s, two things, and actually in early 1960s, the socialist parties were able to somehow organize, although not openly declaring their socialist agenda. And then in the early 1970s, the Islamist parties also began to organize. And these parties have been continuously banned either by military